Well, guys, we do have another update regarding conference realignment. It does seem like it is beginning to kick up a little bit here with FSU. The strange rumor, possibly to the Big 12 along with Clemson, seems really, really unlikely. There are some people saying maybe if the SEC and the Big 10 confirm with Clemson and FSU they don't want them, then maybe Florida State and Clemson look for an off-ramp with the Big 12. Although at that point, if I was either FSU or Clemson, my strategy would be just to wait the Big 10 and the SEC out until I could get into either one of those leagues, because when you look at the TV money right now, it is very comparable, the ACC versus the Big 12. Now, the problem with the ACC is the TV deal is through 2036. That's the death nail. That's why these teams are trying to get out of it, especially Clemson and FSU, with FSU being at the forefront of that. I would wait, because you go to the Big 12, I mean, sure, you're going to eventually get a better TV deal with Clemson and FSU in that conference because they're going to elevate it and make it more attractive. But just in terms of the general sense, is it really worth it to go to the Big 12 from the ACC unless you have an ironclad knowing that the Big 10 and the SEC don't want you, they're done? It seems like I would, if I was Clemson or FSU, I would just wait for one of those conferences to open up a spot. Now, when it comes to the Big Ten specifically, because, you know, they have more teams right now, I think if college football had any semblance of normalcy, you would say, all right, when it comes to the conferences, you can get to 20 teams, but that's it. Because these leagues are going to start becoming, I mean, they're not even conferences anymore. It's like they're sub-leagues at this point. I think the Big Ten is far too big as it is. It's not a conference, and if you add two more teams into it, it's getting ridiculous to the point where you're going to have teams in conference not playing each other for like multiple years because there's so many teams in the conference. It's just dumb. Now, that's why I've always said Clemson and FSU to the SEC makes sense because they've got less teams in the Big Ten right now. But I think they're going to, either way, whichever conference they can get into. Florida State conference realignment discussions, talking about the Big 12. So this is the preferred landing spots for Florida State and Clemson, apparently. Number one, a spot in the SEC or Big 10. That's very straightforward. The main question is, if the SEC and the Big 10 tell them no right now, do they wait it out or do they scramble and try and get into the Big 12? I would imagine they would wait it out as long as everyone else stays in the ACC for now. A reformed ACC with fewer teams splitting revenue. Wow, so even ahead of joining the Big 12, this source is saying they would rather do a reformed ACC. I would imagine kicking teams out, like maybe Wake Forest, Boston College, they have to go to group of 5 leagues and trying to, I mean, that does make sense. The ACC, they do have more valuable teams than the Big 12, but just they're two really different conferences. It's like the ACC is really top heavy. The Big 12's got a lot of middling teams. Then the ACC's got a bunch of dead weight that the Big 12 doesn't have. So it's interesting when you look at those conferences. And yes, that honestly could make sense. The ACC, they've got North Carolina. Duke's really good in basketball. They're an attractive program. Obviously, Clemson for football, Florida State for football. There are still some attractive teams. Louisville normally has a good basketball program. They've been good in football recently. You could do an ACC, maybe kick some teams out somehow. I'm not sure how that would work in terms of the contract, but that would be very interesting. Yeah, there was an original Magnificent Seven that included, Virginia Tech was in that Magnificent Seven. So was Virginia. Yeah, the ACC really does have some programs that if they did kick out the bottom feeders and split it more, with the top dogs taking more money, that honestly would be a good option for Clemson and FSU. It's easier said than done because that TV deal is already done and it's an even split between all of the teams. And obviously the teams towards the bottom in terms of the amount of, revenue they bring in for the league, because that's one of the main problems. If you're splitting the TV deal evenly through all the teams in the conference, but you've got like FSU really bringing like 15% of the revenue, but they're only making 7% because it's split even. That's why FSU's mad. But the real reason they're mad is because of how long the deal is through 2036. That's the death blow to the ACC if it does end up dying. It's because of that. If they were negotiating again in 2026, it would be a lot different for sure. And then it says, would FSU really be interested in joining the Big 12? It all comes down to money. Florida State reportedly tried to get the ACC to adopt an unequal revenue sharing model that would have given FSU a greater share of TV money. If the conference had gone along with the plan, the Seminoles aren't likely suing the conference to leave early if the Big 12 creates a revenue distribution model that would see the Noles paid on par with teams in the Big 10 and the SEC. They will at least listen. Well, certainly they would listen in that case. I'm not sure the Big 12 has the money to do something like that, but that is an interesting wrinkle. That would make a lot of teams within the Big 12 probably mad. Although the Big 12 kind of has a weird structure right now where they've taken a lot of teams from the American, they've taken a lot of teams from the Pac-12, and they've kind of conjumbled them together to form the new Big 12, which is obviously a bigger conference. It just comes down to how badly does the Big 12 want like a legit powerhouse team? Because right now they're lacking that. They lost both Oklahoma and Texas. Could they try and replace that by giving some type of unequal revenue sharing formula to Clemson and FSU, which could potentially be at least more than what they're making in the ACC. And then also the idea is going back to the negotiating table earlier than that horrible 2036 ACC TV deal, which it is. And then there's another thing I wanted to talk about. It is looking like a scenario is opening that could see the ACC lose 6 or more schools and have to backfill with Pac-2 and the best of the Mountain West and the AAC. Tulane, San Diego State, Colorado State, and Boise State would be the most obvious candidates to start. So terrible, terrible, terrible. This is what we all talked about. I talked about it in the winter. This would be the ACC becoming a group of 5. And I don't see the ACC not existing, but if this were to happen to where they lose 6 teams, it would be Clemson, FSU, Miami, NC State, North Carolina, teams like that, the best teams in their conference. You would be looking, they're saying Tulane, definitely San Diego State is a team I've thought of, Boise State as well, go out west, try and create your own theoretical West Wing like the Big Ten did to alleviate the travel. Colorado State, I don't know a ton about Colorado State being necessarily attractive. When you look at like that region, I've always thought UNLV, the Las Vegas market, would be better than Colorado State, but I don't know who really knows there. But yeah, they would be looking, they're saying the Pac-2, so Washington State and Oregon State, if they lose 6, they'd probably try and replace them with around 6, or maybe less because they did add 3 teams with Cal, Stanford, and SMU, so it might be less than 6. But yeah, I would say San Diego State, Boise State, even though they're not very attractive in terms of the realignment aspect. Obviously, their football program is very good. They got the blue field. It would be a really good team to see in a conference like the ACC. But then again, if Boise State is joining the ACC, they're joining a de facto different group of 5, getting a bump in pay, sure, but it's still a group of 5 conference, because that would require, if they join it, you would think Clemson and FSU at least leaving the conference. If they lose 6 teams, it's definitely going to be a group of 5, because you're probably keeping Syracuse. I don't know what Virginia is going to do. I know the Big Ten possibly could be a good fit with Virginia, but Virginia would be, they would be giving up on football at that point. They do have a good basketball program, kind of boring defensive-minded school, but they did, they won a championship back in like 2019. They won March Madness. So Tulane, yeah, I guess Tulane could be an option as well. I was thinking Memphis over Tulane, but either way, kind of similar programs. That would be interesting to see if that ends up happening. So right now, we obviously know FSU and Clemson, they wanted the Big Ten or the SEC, and I think they're going to get into one of those leagues unless something happens. I know there's a rumor going around, and this has been something that's been talked about the last year. The SEC possibly closed for business, saying we don't want any more teams. Whereas the Big Ten, we haven't really heard that. It seems like they're more open. So maybe the Big Ten expanding even more with Clemson and FSU. If you're the Big Ten, it makes total sense. You want a team in the state of Florida. Florida State right now, they're the most attractive, in terms of their football, better than Florida, better than Miami. That's why I thought maybe they take Miami if FSU and Clemson go to the SEC, because the Big Ten wants a team in Florida, I'm guessing, although there could be some issues with Miami. Although I did hear their academics might have passed through in terms of the AAU situation. I know FSU's did. So we will have to see what ends up happening here. I would imagine something is going to come out relatively soon, considering the lawsuit with FSU and the ACC. They want to get out ASAP. The only thing that could prolong this would really complicate it if the Big Ten and the SEC say we're not taking anyone right now. Would FSU and Clemson try and do something like kicking some teams out of the ACC? I'm not sure how that would work, but That was, it looks like their second best option right now. A reformed ACC with fewer teams splitting the revenue. That's kind of what apparently Oregon State and Washington State want to do. They want to use the Pac-12 brand to start their own mini conference, and it would be only about 8 teams, very exclusive, probably mainly Mountain West teams. But the idea is if you only have 8 teams splitting the revenue, you're going to make more money. Obviously, not that that's a big deal. I mean, that's still a group of 5 conference. It's still watered down. That's the problem with a lot of these conferences. The Big Ten and the SEC control all of the big dogs, all of the blue bloods. So all of these other conferences, whether it's the Big 12. I mean, right now the ACC still does have some big dogs like Miami, FSU, and Clemson, but if they lose those, the Big 12's already been watered down. They lost their 2 blue bloods. The ACC possibly could be watered down. The Pac-12 doesn't exist anymore, and now it's just it's total power for the Big Ten and for the SEC. But we will have to see what ends up happening here. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.